The Walt Disney Company's remake of Walt's classic 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, of course, now just called Snow White. Of course, you might remember us covering this story from a few weeks ago from the UK Daily Mail. And that story gave us our first glimpse of the seven people. It seems no wonder they took "and the Seven Dwarves" off of the title of the new remake due out in 2024 from Disney. But then again, it's almost as good as Rachel Zegler, the one who plays the titular role of Snow White. This girl just cannot seem to stop talking, and at some point, I think she's going to actually have to get a plumber to remove her foot from her mouth.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Yeah, it just doesn't end. Rachel Zegler was recently on the streets with the SAG-AFTRA folks on the strike saying that, well, Disney should just pay me more. Well, we'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about some recent rumors about whether or not Disney is actually going to allow Snow White to go forward. There are some suggesting out there that Disney may be looking internally at canning this movie. We'll talk about whether or not that's really possible or what that would entail. Stay tuned. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back to another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today, and make sure you join us at 6 p.m. Eastern today, Sunday, August 6th, for our live show. We will be previewing the Disney earnings call coming up on Wednesday, August 9th, which we will also cover live right here on Valiant Renegade. Let's get into the story.
Reality is that the cartoon was made 85 years ago. It's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power, what a woman is fit for in the world. And so
also the fact that she's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's the proactive one, and she's the one who set the terms.
Yeah, every little girl wants to wait around for her prince beta boy. This has become a common recurring theme with the Walt Disney Company, or more aptly put, a common recurring mistake by the Walt Disney Company when they reimagine their classic pieces. There's a reason these classic IPs have withstood the test of time, whether it's 30 years from the 90s when Alan Menken and Howard Shore were doing things like The Little Mermaid, or if it was 85 years ago as they bring up with Snow White. These characters are still what they are and still draw big crowds, lots of popularity, and quite frankly, elicit a lot of merchandise sales still from little girls everywhere around the world because they're just universal themes. But once again, the Walt Disney Company seems hell-bent on reimagining the past and changing it for modern audiences. Of course, we saw the recent example of how well that worked for The Little Mermaid, which basically did the same thing as what it sounds like they're doing with Snow White. That is, that Ariel really became the hero. Prince Eric, at the end of the movie, wasn't even the one that killed Ursula to win the favor and trust of King Triton. No, that was done by Ariel, kind of wrecking the entire dynamic of the end of that story. But they didn't want the story to be about ultimate true love or God knows what or who knows. But Snow White, no, can't have that one here either. But the problem is that when you have actors and casts out there that go around and constantly tell people a year before the movie comes out how bad the movie's going to be, it's going to have a commercial impact on sales.
if I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
Let me help you, Rachel. There's this little thing out there that you may be familiar with. It's called a contract, and it's something that you and your agency would have signed when you elected to take this job with Disney. Now, if there were provisions in that contract that gave you residuals based on watch time from streaming on Disney Plus, for example, then you're good. If it didn't have those provisions in the contract, then you, your attorneys, and your agents should have addressed this before you signed on the dotted line. You don't get to go back and scream and whine after the fact because you didn't do your job in the first place. Here's the bottom line problem, folks. The Barbie movie from Mattel and Warner Brothers right now is doing numbers that The Little Mermaid should have done several months ago, but it didn't. It's probably going to finish with about 3 times as much box office as The Little Mermaid did, and that's a shame for Disney. I don't think Snow White is going to be any better. Matter of fact, I think the Snow White live-action remake is probably going to come in somewhere maybe around 1/2 to 2/3 the box office of The Little Mermaid, at least as of right now. And the reason I say that is because The Little Mermaid is much more recent in memory. The Little Mermaid is much more recent in the public zeitgeist, the last 2 or 3 generations that grew up with The Little Mermaid, as a matter of fact. Some of the most popular music to ever come out of any Disney animated film in history. And that movie, which made some frankly rather radical changes to not only the characters, but the story itself, did not fare that well at the box office. Sure, you can say $500,000 to $600 million is a lot of money, and you'd be right. The problem is, it's not going to cover the cost of what Disney spent to produce it and market it into theaters. We've covered that before ad nauseum. Snow White is looking to come in with a similar price tag of somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 to $250 million, and that's before they spend another dime on marketing the film. That movie's going to have to get up to somewhere near $600 to $700 million on a bad day to even think about breaking even, if not potentially closer to 8. And Snow White, frankly, has never had anywhere near the popularity of, say, Ariel has, at least with visits in Walt Disney World and Disneyland, again, because of the recency of the characters. Now, yes, Snow White is still very popular, but it's going to have a taller ladder to climb than The Little Mermaid, quite frankly, when it comes to commercial success. And none of these stories and all of these radical changes that have gone on with this movie that the actors are announcing, or that we've seen pictures of from places like we showed you earlier, where it's not even Seven Dwarves anymore, thank you, Peter Dinklage, but now just 7 diversity hires. Nobody can identify with this movie anymore, and that's the problem. Now, even more recently, we've seen some rumors come out about this film that suggest that maybe Disney is considering cutting it all together with the public backlash or how bad it looks. Now, Disney would have approved all this up front. They knew going in what this movie was going to look like, so I'm not so sure about that angle. But if Disney were to actually cut this film from theatrical release, they would have a bevy of issues to deal with after making that choice. One of the big issues is what you see on the screen right now. Look at the filming locations. Yes, they did do some on-location filming in Germany, but the bulk of the filming for this movie was done in London and at Pinewood Studios, somewhere that Disney quite frequently uses. Now, what's important to note about that, and the reason Disney would have done it, was to get their hands on some of that very, very rich UK film tax credit cash. And in the case of spending, say, $250 million, and let's say 200 of that was for actual eligible expenses that would get you the credit, that means Disney could be getting back somewhere close to $50 million in cash from the UK film tax credit program. And that's a number that we have frequently seen come back for these major Disney productions time and time again. We've seen it with Indiana Jones. We've seen it with things like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and all the other stuff they've done over there, including a lot of the Star Wars projects. So the first thing you'd have to understand is that if Disney were to dump the film, in other words, never release it into theaters or anywhere else for that matter, Disney would be sacrificing that entire film tax credit. In other words, the UK government would take back the $50 million in cash tax credit subsidies they would have afforded the Walt Disney Company to produce that show there. That seems very unlikely for Disney to want to do. Then, of course, there's the second piece of that pie, and that is what Disney would have to pay out folks like above-the-line talent, actors, producers, directors, writers, so on and so forth, for rescinding the theatrical release window. When these folks sign contracts to do a film like Snow White, they're getting guaranteed theatrical releases by and large. And if they don't put it in the theater, a lot of times these studios get hauled into court and are made to write out big checks to pay out those back-end deals or residuals that otherwise would have been there with a theatrical release. Think back to 2021 with all the kerfuffle about how Bob Chapek decided to release Black Widow day and date on Disney+. What happened? ScarJo hauled him into court for violation and breach of contract. We saw the same thing with Warner Brothers that same year when Jason Kilar decided to take the entire 2021 slate of Warner Brothers releases and drop them onto HBO Max with Project Popcorn, same day as they came out in theaters. Warner Brothers had to pay out hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for those contractual changes. Disney would most likely be in the same boat if they did this with Snow White. So while I think it's very possible there is probably some discussion at Disney about any and every release they're doing and how ultimately it will come out or not come out, I don't think at the end of the day that Disney would make the decision to terminate Snow White from going into theaters because, frankly, it's going to cost them too much money. Getting a tax write-off or write-down is spectacular, and that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, if Disney's cash flows are actually going to go out in the other direction from making this decision, that's something that's probably going to prevent them from doing it. This movie is going to come out in 2024, and that doesn't mean that they might not go back and try to clean a few things up or do some reshoots that they're so famous for right now with so many of their pictures. But stay tuned. We'll be covering it right here. Make sure to join us today at 6 p.m. Eastern, Sunday, right here, August 6th on Valiant Renegade for the live show. Hope to see you there. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Leave a comment below before you head out. Until next time, take care.